Alaska is the ideal destination if you want to escape from society. As the most sparsely populated state in the US, you get plenty of space away from authority figures or prying eyes who might be curious about what you're doing. Because of this, my home state draws all sorts of unusual and sometimes shady groups. I've come across Scientology centers hidden at the ends of remote dirt roads, heard tales of survivalists who claim to have bunkers made of shipping containers in the mountains, and even met people who had escaped religious cults in the interior that aim to keep their members cut off from the rest of the world. If you're looking for secrecy, you'll find it here. I was born and raised in Juneau, one of the only real cities in the state. Back then, the population was around 220,000, and you could drive across the city in about 30 minutes, which gives you an idea of what we consider a big city up north. The only other major city is Fairbanks, and these two places are connected by a 350-mile, two-lane highway. It's a 7-hour drive each way through some of the most breathtaking landscapes on Earth. Towering mountains rise on both sides as you pass through the region near Denali National Park. Then you drive into massive canyons carved by ancient glaciers and rivers over thousands of years. After Denali, it's another 3-hour drive across a vast, flat interior with distant mountain peaks on the horizon. I describe this so you understand just how isolated Alaska can feel. Even on the highway, once you leave the cities behind, it's nothing but untamed wilderness as far as the eye can see, aside from the occasional tiny town that might have 800 people on a good day. A decade ago, there were even fewer. Alaskan women are tough. We change tires, hunt, fish, camp, and generally have a deeper connection to the outdoors than many women in more populated areas. There's a joke that Juneau is the biggest rural town in the country. All of this provides context for the story I'm about to tell. When I was in high school, things felt different. Maybe because I was young and reckless. I had that same tough mindset and thought I could handle anything. In my senior year, I decided to treat myself to a solo camping trip in the mountains past Talkeetna. Nothing fancy, just a night or two in the most stunning state during the most beautiful time of year, mid-June. Summer up north has an eerie quality to it because the sun never truly sets. If you've ever seen the movie Midsummer, it's like that. It only dims slightly before staying at a perpetual twilight. I felt so safe in the constant daylight that I didn't even consider how dangerous it could be. That false sense of security nearly got me killed, or worse. My second mistake was not telling anyone where I was going. I simply packed my bag, grabbed lunch from a sandwich shop, and headed out. The drive was uneventful, about 2.5 hours of heading north along the highway, jamming to the radio. Once you leave the Matanuska Valley, you're surrounded by mountains again, with dense spruce and evergreen forests on both sides. There are occasional clearings from logging, but otherwise, it feels like the wilderness is creeping in from all directions. Still, I felt connected to civilization, which led to my biggest mistake: not staying in a designated campground. Being a high schooler with only a part-time job, I didn't want to pay the $15 campground fee, but I was also too afraid of a fine. So I decided to find a free spot instead. My dad's old map showed an abandoned mining site up in the mountains nearby. That seemed like the perfect place for an overnight stay. I must have thought it would be exciting to camp in an old ghost town. I pulled off the highway, packed my gear, sprayed on some bug repellent, grabbed my map and compass, and hiked into the woods. This wasn't my first time. My dad and I had gone backpacking in the wilderness throughout my childhood. I had solid navigation skills and had taken survival courses. I wasn't just some clueless teenager wandering into the wild. At least, that's what I thought. After about a 45-minute hike uphill, I reached what should have been the mining camp. But there was nothing, just an old concrete foundation with a few holes in it. I was disappointed but not surprised. I set up my campsite in the woods nearby and started a fire for dinner on the concrete slab. Standard camping safety means cooking away from where you sleep, just in case any curious bears come sniffing around. The last thing I wanted was a 1,200-pound grizzly poking its head into my tent. It was late, around 10 p.m., but the sun was still bright in the sky. By the time I finished eating, it was close to 11, as dark as it would get. I hunkered down in my tent for the night, feeling secure in the overgrowth's privacy. Then I woke up to the sound of movement in the distance, slow, deliberate steps crashing through the underbrush. My first thought was hunters. My dad and I had encountered a few on past trips, so I wasn't too worried. I closed my eyes again, expecting them to pass. Then I heard a voice. A man's voice carried through the stillness. "Who the hell is camping on our land?" I froze. My stomach sank. I had made a huge mistake. As I hurried to grab my bag and slip on my shoes to go apologize, the man spoke again. "When we find you, you're dead. Trespassers don't walk away." That's when the situation turned deadly. I couldn't just pack up with armed men nearby. Silently, I slipped out of my tent, grabbed my keys, and slunk into the woods as quietly as possible. My plan was to hide, wait for them to leave, then pack up and get out. For 20 minutes, I crouched behind a log, barely breathing. Then I heard another voice. It sounded like they had found my tent. I heard them rummaging through my things before someone shouted, "Still warm, and it's a girl. She left her clothes." The first man responded, "All right, fan out, find her. She's not getting away with this." I no longer cared that they had found my spare set of clothes. I just knew I had to get out. As carefully as I could, I crept down the mountain for a good half hour, barely making a sound. Once their voices faded, I decided to run. I tore through the underbrush, stumbling and scraping myself along the way, but I didn't care. I just needed to get to my car. When I finally reached the road, I realized something was terribly wrong. My car wasn't where I left it. Panicking, I picked a direction and started walking. When I rounded a bend, I saw it, my car with two men standing beside it. They were armed, dressed in military surplus gear. I ducked into the bushes and watched. A while later, several more men emerged from the trail carrying my belongings. They dumped my gear beside the car, then hopped on their ATVs and drove off. When I was sure they were gone, I sprinted to my vehicle. There was a note on the windshield. It read, "If we catch you here again, you won't be walking away. Consider this your only warning." I quickly gathered what was left of my gear and saw what they had done. They had slashed and destroyed my belongings, probably as a message. But honestly, I was just grateful to be alive. Since then, I've only camped in designated areas. If you're planning to go camping, take my advice. Stick to the official campgrounds, and always let someone know where you're going. Shout, my name is Adam. I'm from Chicago, and I'm Muslim. Back in 2016, I would always get bullied in middle school for being Muslim. People would call me horrible names and insult me, but no one was as bad as these two bullies of mine, Ethan and Jake. They took it to a whole other level. The things they did to me included pulling down my pants, hitting me, chasing me, shoving me into lockers, and even dunking my head into toilets, all because I was Muslim. I had some friends who weren't hateful, but they never really stood up for me when they saw me getting bullied. Now, let me get to the real point of this story. It was around the first weekend of December, and winter was coming in fast. My parents had nothing planned for the weekend, so they decided we should take a trip to our cabin in the Upper Peninsula. I invited my best friend Noah to come along since we had been close for years. We left the city at around 6 p.m. on Friday night and arrived at the cabin at about 8:45. Once we got there, we unpacked, took off our shoes, got into our night clothes, brushed our teeth, and went to bed. My parents stayed in their room while Noah and I shared a room. The next morning, we had breakfast, and after that, Noah and I decided to go geocaching since our cabin was right next to a large state forest with tons of hiking trails. Noah and I had been into geocaching since first grade. My parents said we could go, but only for 4 hours max. An hour and a half passed, and we had already found 4 or 5 hidden treasures along our hike. We signed our names on the log sheets and traded small items before putting everything back in place. Eventually, we reached a waterfall. It was a beautiful sight. The next geocache was about 0.4 miles away. As we walked, chatting and searching for the next hidden cache, we suddenly heard a noise behind us. We turned around, and what we saw was scarier than any horror movie I had ever watched. 2 people, Ethan and Jake, my bullies from school. How in the world did they know exactly where we would be? Did their families have a cabin up here too? Did they somehow follow us? It didn't seem possible. They were our age and we were still in middle school. There was no way they could have made it up here alone. My mind was racing, trying to figure it out. I finally managed to say, "What the hell are you doing here? How did you even find us? You thought you could get away from us, but you were wrong," Ethan sneered. That's when I noticed something in Ethan's hand. A knife. My stomach dropped. Before I could react, Jake lunged toward me. Before I even had a chance to run, he grabbed me from behind, locking his arms around me in an iron grip. I struggled, but he was too strong. He was dragging me toward the waterfall's edge, where there were no barriers, just open air and a deep drop into the freezing water below. My heart pounded. Did he actually plan to throw me over? I didn't want to know the answer. I heard Noah screaming for help, and when I turned, I saw Ethan holding him with a knife pressed to his throat. We were both in serious danger. Jake growled in my ear, "This is what you deserve, you terrorist. Your people killed my uncle in 9/11. His voice was filled with fury. I pleaded with him, trying to explain that my family was born in the US and that we weren't even religious, but he wouldn't listen. He held onto me tighter. I started crying, begging for my life, screaming at the top of my lungs for him to let me go. But he didn't care. Then, out of nowhere, gunshots rang out. Everyone froze. Jake released me, and I collapsed onto my knees. I turned to see a hunter running toward us, rifle in hand. He kept yelling, demanding that they let us go and get lost. He was getting closer, shouting again and again. Ethan and Jake looked at each other in panic before taking off, disappearing into the trees. The hunter approached us slowly, making sure the bullies were gone before asking if we were okay. We both nodded, still in shock, and thanked him. He asked who those kids were, and we told him the truth, that they were school bullies who had somehow followed us all the way from Chicago to the woods. He was stunned by what he had just heard. He offered us a ride back to our cabin, and we gladly accepted. We arrived about 15 minutes later. When we walked in, my mom immediately asked who the man was. My parents were clearly confused. I don't blame them. I told them, "This guy saved us from 2 bullies who have been tormenting me at school." At first, my parents didn't believe me. They looked skeptical. But as Noah and I explained everything, their faces changed. They were in complete shock. We went straight to the police station to file a report. Noah and the hunter backed up everything I said. While my parents waited in the lobby, the officers told us they would try to contact our school board back in the city. That night and the following day were quiet. We didn't do much, just stayed in and tried to recover from what happened. We drove back home late Sunday afternoon. I was still shaken by the whole thing, but after a while, I was able to calm down. On Monday, I was called to the principal's office. I was told that Ethan and Jake had both been expelled for what they had done to me and Noah. That was the best news I had ever heard. I finally felt safe knowing they wouldn't be able to bother me anymore. For the rest of middle school and high school, I didn't face any physical bullying again. Sometimes people still called me names, but I didn't take it personally. They were just ignorant kids. I never saw Jake again. The last time I saw Ethan was in 2020, just walking down a street. He didn't even look at me. These days, no one in Chicago makes fun of me for being Muslim. The city has become much more accepting. I eventually moved on from that horrible experience. But whenever I see someone saying hateful things about Muslims, whether online or in person, the memory of that day in the woods comes rushing back. It reminds me that, unfortunately, there will always be people filled with hate in this world. This all started when I was at my childhood best friend's place for what was supposed to be a simple movie night. We hadn't hung out in a while and were catching up. Her apartment was cozy, slightly messy, and packed with cute decorations. We were in our most comfortable loungewear, ready to watch fairy tale movies. Her place wasn't the most organized. Things were a bit scattered, but it was clean and had this personal touch that always made me feel at ease. We decided to order pizza for dinner. She mentioned that Tanner, someone I hadn't met before, would be the one bringing it over. At first, I was a little annoyed. I thought she had invited some guy to hang out with us, which wasn't part of my plan. But I was in for a surprise. Tanner wasn't a guest, just the guy delivering our pizza that night. When he arrived, there was this strange tension in the air. He seemed really anxious, fumbling with the pizza boxes and avoiding direct eye contact. My friend quickly introduced us, and I noticed how overly grateful she was toward him. Like Tanner did more for her than just bring food. He handed over the pizzas and we had a brief, forced small talk. My friend was extra kind to him, even though he was clearly awkward. He wasn't much of a conversationalist and seemed completely out of place. Then, Tanner asked for my number. I felt awkward because my friend was right there watching, so I gave it to him. We only chatted for about 5 minutes before my friend politely hinted that he should leave, saying something like, "Thanks so much for dropping this off." He seemed to get the message. We both gave him a quick hug before she added another casual, "Drive safe," which was basically another cue to go. After he left, I asked my friend what the deal was. She explained that Tanner was basically her unpaid errand guy. He ran to the store for her, picked up food, and did all sorts of little favors. I got the impression that he was just a lonely guy craving attention, especially from women. My friend and I were both pretty young and clueless at the time, around 22, but we could tell something about him felt off. We just couldn't quite put our finger on what exactly it was. Tanner started a group chat with my friend and me. Every couple of weeks, he would send me a meme, just enough to keep himself in my mind, but not enough to be pushy. Maybe he had been ignored or blocked by other girls before and was trying to stay on my radar without giving me a solid reason to cut him off. I can't say for sure, that's just how it felt. He also offered to help out with errands. The first time, I politely declined, but he kept offering every single weekend. Eventually, I made the mistake of accepting his help. I should have known better. I had found a great deal on a second-hand washing machine online, but I had no clue how to transport and install it. When I mentioned it in the group chat, Tanner eagerly volunteered to handle everything. He picked it up and set it up perfectly, saving me a huge hassle. I tried to pay him for his trouble, but he wouldn't take any money. I kept insisting, and eventually he said I could repay him by going on a hike with him. That made me uncomfortable. It felt too personal, almost like a date. But Tanner framed it as just a casual outing, a way to even the score for the favor. I convinced myself it was fair, and besides, I figured he didn't have many friends. Maybe he just needed some company. Even though I agreed, something about spending time with him alone in nature didn't sit right with me. The day of the hike arrived, and Tanner chose a nearby trail I was familiar with. It was beautiful, and as we walked, he chatted about regular stuff, work, the weather, his hobbies. Everything seemed normal. Then, he suggested we step off the main path because he wanted to show me something special. I had no idea what to expect, but when we reached this secluded spot, I saw it. A body. My heart started pounding so hard I could barely think. Tanner just stood there, eerily calm, completely unbothered. His casual attitude made the whole thing even worse. It felt like he wasn't just showing me a corpse. He was revealing a darker side of himself. Smelled awful, but not the way movies make it seem. I had no idea how long it had been there. I'm no expert, but I assumed it had smelled even worse before and had faded over time. My stomach turned. I muttered some excuse about needing to get back and started walking quickly toward the main trail. I kept urging Tanner to follow. I didn't know if this was some weird intimidation tactic, a way of showing me he wasn't just some awkward pushover. Maybe he was trying to send a message, like, "You should know I'm comfortable with things like this." Or maybe he just wanted me to remember him. Some people fear being forgotten, that people only think about them when they're physically around. Maybe he felt that way. Maybe he thought showing me a dead body would make him unforgettable. I don't know. But what I do know is that he acted like it wasn't a big deal. As we walked back, my instincts went into overdrive. I started scanning the area for other hikers, park rangers, anyone who could make me feel like I wasn't alone with him. Finally, I spotted someone else on the trail. I called out, not to expose Tanner, just to ask for directions to the parking lot. I wanted someone else nearby. I insisted that he walk us back, pretending I couldn't understand his instructions until he finally agreed to guide us. Having that extra person there made me feel a little safer. Once we reached the parking lot, I called my friend. I told her I was with Tanner and that he was driving me back to her place. making sure she knew exactly where I was. Then I texted her the full story to have it on record. When we got to her apartment, we thanked Tanner and quickly told him to leave. My friend already knew the gist of what happened, but when I told her all the details, the insects, the decomposing face that was still recognizable, she was horrified. Not just by the dead body, but by how casual Tanner had been about the whole thing. She admitted she had always felt something was off about him, but she never imagined anything that disturbing. We both knew we had to cut him out of our lives. The problem was, my friend had become dependent on him for errands, so she didn't want to just suddenly drop him. We came up with a plan, a slow fade out. We would only interact with him when other people were around. We would take longer and longer to reply to his messages. I would never ask for his help again, and my friend would rely on him less and less. Tanner kept texting, still offering to run errands, still checking in on weekends. My friend started responding with, "I'm trying to be more independent, but I really appreciate all you've done." She eased him out of her life gradually. Eventually, when she started dating someone new, she introduced Tanner to her boyfriend, and just like that, Tanner stopped reaching out. That night, I called the police. It took months before I heard anything about the body. About 4 months later, I saw a news report. Authorities had discovered a body near that hiking trail. They had made an arrest. Not Tanner. It was some other guy Tanner followed on social media. I have no idea if Tanner had anything to do with it. But looking back, I've learned one thing: always trust your gut. A few years ago, back in 2018, my partner and I set out on a road trip through Western Canada. We rented a car in Calgary and made our way towards Banff, then up through Jasper before looping back through Kelowna and returning to Calgary. Altogether, we were on the road for about 5 weeks, mostly sleeping at national park campgrounds or designated rest stops. One evening, while driving along a remote stretch of highway between Fernie and Castlegar, we came across a provincial campground by a lake. It seemed like a perfect spot to stop for the night, with a large parking area, picnic benches, and a wooden shelter. The location was quite isolated, but there were a few other campers there, mostly people in RVs or trailers, though we weren't the only ones with a tent. We arrived just before sundown, quickly setting up our tent while exchanging polite greetings with the other campers. One man stood out, a senior, probably in his mid-60s, who had parked his motorhome near ours. He was friendly, but perhaps a bit too eager to chat. At one point, he noticed our camping stove and mentioned he had a big bag of coffee beans in his motorhome if we wanted some. However, he then oddly added that he didn't even drink coffee because he didn't like the taste. He repeatedly offered to have us come inside his motorhome to take some beans, which struck us as a bit strange. We politely declined, and eventually he wandered off. Once our tent was set up, we headed to the shelter to cook dinner. My partner and I exchanged glances, both of us sensing something was a little off about the guy, though we weren't sure if we were just being paranoid. While cooking, we noticed him walking toward the lake, seemingly for a stroll. As we ate, we spotted him returning and deliberately trying not to be seen. We avoided eye contact and focused on our meal, but he eventually approached us anyway. Despite us clearly being in the middle of eating, he struck up a conversation again. Not wanting to be rude, we responded politely but kept things brief. He asked questions about our relationship, whether we were married, if we lived together, if we had kids or wanted any. Under normal circumstances, these could have been harmless questions, but coming from a stranger in such a remote setting, they carried an uncomfortable undertone. He also noticed that we were drinking water and asked if we liked soda. He mentioned having a case of cola in his motorhome and said we could take a few if we wanted, though he quickly added that he didn't drink it himself. Again, he kept insisting we come to his motorhome to get some, but we declined. By this point, my partner and I were exchanging uneasy looks, realizing that neither of us felt comfortable around him. We quickly finished our meal and decided to leave the shelter, figuring it would be easier to remove ourselves from the situation than expect him to. After cleaning up, packing away our cooking gear, and making sure our tent was secure, we prepared for the night. Just as we were finishing up, he passed by again on his way back to his motorhome, repeating his offer for soda and even suggesting we could watch some TV inside with him. Again, we declined, now firmly unsettled by his persistence. As the last light of the evening faded, we decided to take a short walk down to the lake to brush our teeth and toss out our trash in the campground bins. As we approached the bins, we suddenly noticed a large shadowy figure leaning into one of them. Before we could react, the figure jumped down onto all fours and sprinted toward the tree line. Both of us froze. There was no mistaking what we had just seen. A large, cat-like creature with a long tail. We had just stumbled upon a mountain lion rummaging through the trash. Thankfully, the big cat seemed more afraid of us than we were of it and disappeared into the forest. Still shaken, we quickly turned back and fast walked up the hill to our campsite, agreeing that sleeping in the tent no longer felt like a safe option. Not knowing if the mountain lion was lurking nearby, we decided not to take any chances. We got into the car, locked the doors, reclined the seats, and spent the night inside. By morning, the campground was still quiet. We packed up our tent as quickly as possible and drove off, relieved to leave everything about that place behind. We never saw the old man or the mountain lion again, but as we continued our journey, we couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered from the previous night. Had we misread the man's intentions? Maybe he was just a lonely old traveler looking for company. But then again, our instincts had been screaming at us that something wasn't right. Later that day, I got a call from my brother back home. He had seen a news report about a manhunt in British Columbia after a series of violent crimes. 2 suspects were on the run, wanted for multiple killings up north near the Yukon border. They looked nothing like the man we had met, but hearing that news made us wonder, what if our gut instincts were right? What if we had narrowly avoided something far worse? To this day, I still believe in trusting your gut. If something doesn't feel right, there's usually a reason. I've had my fair share of eerie experiences while hiking, but a few remain burned in my memory. The summer after I finished high school, I decided to take a solo overnight trip into a forest near an old estate. I planned for a quiet getaway, just me, the wilderness, and some good food. After setting up a comfortable campsite, I even built a makeshift barrier out of fallen branches around my spot. By the time I was preparing to cook a steak over the fire, I felt completely at ease. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint, the sound of leaves shifting under something big. Whatever it was, it moved in a steady, deliberate rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. I froze, straining my ears, then called out, "Who's there?" hoping to scare off whatever was lurking. But the footsteps didn't stop. Instead, they came closer. The steps grew so near that I should have been able to see something in the glow of my headlamp. I swept the light through the trees, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. But there was nothing. The footsteps had stopped, yet an intense, lingering feeling of being watched made my skin crawl. That was enough for me. I grabbed my keys and sprinted to my car, abandoning everything. As I sat in my car trying to calm down, a new fear hit me. I had left the fire burning. I couldn't risk causing a wildfire. Gathering my courage, I forced myself to go back. The only way to the campsite was a narrow, overgrown gravel path. As I walked, the sound returned. Thud, thud, thud. This time, the noise bounced between the trees around me, closing in. I didn't wait to find out what it was. The next morning, I returned with my brother. Thankfully, the fire had gone out on its own, but my steak had been cooked to a crisp. The charred, fly-covered remains were the only sign of my panicked escape. But that wasn't the only strange experience I had near the estate. One evening, I was jogging through the same area as dusk settled in. I was hurrying back to my car before dark, worried about getting locked inside the fenced-off agricultural zone. The road leading out past an ancient trail, a path so old it had been used for centuries, crossing a shallow stream at a natural ford. As I approached a bend where the road curved toward the exit, I saw something near the trail. A figure stood about 50 feet ahead, completely motionless. It had long hair and seemed to be wearing a heavy, draped garment, almost like an old-fashioned cloak. At first, I barely noticed it, just a shadow blending into the trees. But as I ran closer, I focused on it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't move. It didn't react to me at all. It simply stood there, unnaturally still, as if keeping watch over the ancient trail. I hesitated, raising a hand in a half-hearted wave to see if it was just another person. No response. The air around me felt dense, as if silence itself was pressing in. I didn't wait to learn more. I veered off the road, sprinting through a nearby field, not stopping until I reached my car. Could it have been a random stranger? Maybe, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way it stood, the way it blended into the dark, the way it felt wrong. These encounters reminded me of a story I once heard from an old worker who had lived near the estate back in the 1930s. He's long gone now, but he swore that, as a child, he and some friends had seen a soldier on horseback riding through the woods. The chilling part? The rider had no body beneath his chest, just a floating torso gripping the reins. There's something strange about those woods. I don't know what it is, but I don't go there often. This happened when I was 18. My boyfriend at the time and two of our friends decided to go camping in a small wooded area near a residential neighborhood that was still being built. When I say small, I mean it wasn't very large. On one side, there were unfinished houses with no proper walls, windows, or doors, just skeletal frames. On the other side, there was a long, empty driveway leading to a house that sat far back, at least half a mile past the edge of the trees. Once night fell, the place felt completely abandoned. We arrived in the late afternoon, set everything up: tent, campfire, chairs, the usual for a night outdoors. As the sun began to set, we were sitting around the fire when we suddenly heard a scream. At first, it seemed to be coming from a few hundred feet deeper into the woods. It was loud, frantic, a woman's scream. At first, we couldn't make out what she was saying, but then we started to hear clear words: "Help!" and "No." The last scream was the worst. It was cut off mid-sentence, leaving behind a chilling silence. The trees were dense, and as it got darker, it became impossible to see beyond the glow of our fire. None of us knew what to do, but we all agreed on one thing: we needed to get out of there. We didn't even bother packing up our things. We just ran. The way out wasn't simple either. The screaming had come from the direction of the unfinished neighborhood, which was where we had parked. That meant we couldn't go straight to the car. Instead, we had to go around the woods, past the long driveway, and loop back to the houses from the main road. As soon as we were out of the trees, I called the police. I was panicked, trying to explain what I had heard, but the dispatcher brushed it off. Probably just an animal making noise. But I knew that what I had heard wasn't an animal. When we finally reached the car, it was parked facing the woods. We were catching our breath, still shaken, when we saw something moving. A man stepped out from the trees, dragging something heavy, wrapped in what looked like a sheet or some kind of fabric. He saw us. For a moment, we all just stared at him, frozen. Then he started walking toward our car. His steps were slow, deliberate. He never looked away from us. I was fumbling to keep the police on the phone, but just as the man got closer, a patrol car pulled into the neighborhood. The man immediately dropped whatever he was dragging and bolted back into the woods. The officers chased after him, and eventually, we learned the horrifying truth. He had just taken a woman's life, barely 400 feet from where we had been camping. I still get chills thinking about how close we were to becoming his next victims. To this day, I can't step into a forest without hearing the echoes of those screams. Back when I was in college from 2009 to 2015, I was really into metal detecting. I knew about an old military trail and river crossing hidden deep in a remote part of the woods that I was pretty sure not many people knew about. One cold morning in winter, I finally made up my mind to go check it out with my metal detector. The trail was about a mile or two away from a public park along the Clear Fork River in Abilene, Texas. I parked my SUV, gathered all my equipment, which included a small serrated digging tool, and started making my way through the dense trees and underbrush toward the path. About halfway into the woods, I came upon a clearing and noticed a tent and a campsite sitting about 40 yards from the river, completely isolated. There were empty cans scattered around, some old clothes, and other signs that made it obvious someone had been living there. I didn't stick around for long and just kept moving. As I was walking past the tent, a rough-looking man suddenly emerged from the brush just a few feet away from me. We startled each other equally. After some quick and casual small talk, he asked me what I was doing out there. I told him about the old trail, my metal detecting hobby, and even threw in a little lie saying that the spot was pretty well known among hobbyists like me. That last part seemed to make him a bit uneasy. He started asking me if I had touched anything at his campsite. I told him no, other than accidentally stepping on one of the cans. But what really seemed to matter to him was whether I had looked inside the tent, which, to be honest, I hadn't. The man told me that his wife had kicked him out of their place a few days ago, and he was just staying out in the woods until he could figure things out. Something about it didn't quite sit right with me, but I didn't question him further. Eventually, I told him I was going to continue on my way. With a strange look on his face, he suggested I not walk behind his campsite because he had recently gone to the bathroom there. Whether or not there was fresh waste back there, I wasn't planning to stick around much longer anyway. I walked a little further toward the old trail I had planned to detect, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I ended up turning back toward the river and making my way quickly back to my vehicle. I never saw the man again until about 2 years later. His face showed up in the local news after he was arrested for killing his wife. He had ended her life and buried her in that exact wooded area where I had run into him that day. I can't say for sure whether it was the same day as the crime or not, but apparently he had just finished burying her when I met him.